I don't care if the NBA all of a sudden puts another NBA Cup that immediately follows the first. The Knicks make that one, then make it to the finals. Then the NBA says, we are going to institute a rule only for the New York Knicks that says that you have to play a back-to-back-to-back-to-back-to-back-to-back-to-back-to-back-to-back. And on the last end, they have to play on the road in Sacramento. They should win that game by 40. And they lost by 1 million in Sacramento after 2 days rest, a month after the Cup. Your job as a team, I'm not even going to put any blame on any particular individual, and this is everyone in an organization, is to help set up a system and help set up a culture so that when you have struggles, you don't collapse inward on yourself. I think they would make a starting lineup change. One way is, okay, let's see what you can do with the point of attack, and I start Deuce, and then you have 5 3-point shooters in the starting lineup. I could see them reinserting Mitchell Robinson into the starting lineup at some point, especially with the way that Robinson has been playing lately. Ultimately, I really think the best version of this team has Mitchell Robinson on the floor. He is such a swing factor.
This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. And if you're watching the pod on YouTube, you can tell that I'm not joined by my brilliant co-host, Jeff, as always. Jeff is feeling under the weather, unfortunately. Hope he feels better soon. But I am joined by another brilliant guest, senior NBA writer for The Athletic and host of the excellent podcast, Katz and Shoot. I have with me the great Fred Katz. Fred, it's good to see you, man. How are you doing?
What an intro. Glad I paid you to say that.
Yeah, I'll take every dollar. Even though it was only $5, it was worth it, Fred.
Yeah, I mean, you're let's put it this way. You're easy to buy, you know?
Like, that is true.
I can win you over with a quick just some quick cash. Really easy.
Super chatters, I hope you're hearing that. It doesn't take much. Fred, I want to jump in because we have a short period of time together and I have, so much value for your thoughts. And something I appreciate about you in particular is that obviously you have the relationship building side of things, the sourcing information, but the thing is that you also understand the X's and O's. You also understand the data to a large extent. You're kind of able to have this holistic perspective on things. So that's why I really kind of appreciate your insights because you kind of understand things from that broader landscape. Something I wanted to talk about with you was you had this great article last month about offensive rebounding kind of being the new wave across the league because teams question the conventional wisdom, something that we do here, that crashing the offensive rebounds or crashing the offensive boards is too costly because you'd give up too many points in transition. And what's interesting to me is not necessarily like that it's a new concept on its face or anything. Like you may have analytics people being like, we've known about this from a math sense for a while. It's like, yes, that's true in terms of the possession battle. But the beauty to me is of what you wrote is all that's required for like implementation of this kind of thing, right? So you may have a concept and it may be like statistically it works out. Extra possessions are more valuable than whatever else you're giving up on the other end, but you have to install the system. You have to get buy-in organizationally. You have to get buy-in from a player standpoint. You have to weather not getting results immediately and still be able to move forward, right? Because things are going to average out over time. So my question for you really is like, how difficult is the implementation aspect in the NBA? Like you have, your sense of player-coach relationships. You get to see those interactions. And is that a primary factor in like preventing or slowing innovation in the league in terms of those things, organizational buy-in, players' willingness to do stuff? What are your thoughts on that?
All right. I'm going to go to the most extreme example that I can possibly go to that has nothing to do with offensive rebounds, but I think you'll get the analogy.
Great.
To make my point. So I've had this conversation with coaches a lot. It's a philosophical question I like to pose. And it almost always has the same answer. Would you rather have a coach who has C plus X's and O's and A plus buy-in, or A plus X's and O's and C plus buy-in? They almost always say C plus X's and O's because the reality is if you have A plus X's and O's and C plus buy-in, you might actually have in effect F X's and O's because you're not getting the buy-in. Like you're not getting guys to actually run the X's and O's you want. You could be the smartest guy in the entire world, but you have to have those sorts of I don't even want to call them interpersonal skills, because there are coaches who I would say don't have like typically great interpersonal skills who have amazing buy-in, but for whatever reason they have it. I've also gotten interesting responses too from coaches who have been like, well, like C plus X's knows and A plus buy-in is not necessarily possible, because players are smart enough to where if you don't know what the hell you're doing, then eventually they figure that out. But I'm like, that's a really interesting point. Eventually they figure that out, and then the buy-in number starts to go down. So like over time, the buy-in will drop if your stuff is all C plus. They'll be like, why is this not working? And they'll figure it out, whether immediately or after it just continues not to work, or you continue not to find answers, and guys will start to get unhappy or whatever else. And I think that's interesting. But in terms of just like for the sake of the hypothetical, is that what you'd rather have? They pretty much always say C plus X's knows. And I'll give you the extreme example. It has nothing to do with offensive rebounding. How many players who just absolutely objectively suck at free throws go granny style?
I want to say zero. I'm maybe there's one guy I'm missing, but I want to say
no.
Zero.
I mean, like since Rick Barry, like I can't think of anybody. And the reason why is not because that style doesn't work, and it's not because somebody who hits 40% of free throws in the conventional way to shoot free throws is just eventually going to figure it out. Like if you're doing it year after year after year after year after year, and you're still shooting 40% from free throw, you should try something else, but you can't get buy-in it because you're going to be made fun of. And so you can't get buy-in. And it's as simple as that. I find that, and I think this is true for life in general, but all this stuff becomes even more amplified when you're talking about playing sports and competition in the NBA, especially at this level, which is that all the time we look at players and we look at their decision-making on the court, and we use that as a way to determine if a guy has a high basketball IQ or a low basketball IQ, because that makes sense. They make smart decisions, probably a high basketball IQ. They make dumb decisions, probably a low basketball IQ. That does make sense. But I find that sometimes once you get to know certain players, they'll really surprise you by their incredible knowledge. And you'll start thinking, okay, why is this guy not making good decisions on the court then? And often the answer is not because of intelligence, it's because of ego. Well, yeah, I realize in a non-biased situation, if I'm just removed from the situation, I can tell you what the right decision is. But I'm me. So I can figure out how to do this. And I say all of that to say that if you can't get buy-in, and that's not just true for players, it's true from an organizational level, you have to have somebody to buy into what you're selling. And you have to get pretty large support in order to try things. There are analytics people who pitch, oh, there's this innovative strategy that the numbers say this is going to work. Numbers say this is going to work. For years, the numbers told football coaches, if you go for it on fourth down more, it's going to work in the long run. If you have to go for it on fourth down more, you have to. They didn't do it because they're like, in practicality, this is a great way for me to get fired quicker too. So they didn't do it. Now they do it more. One thing I've always found interesting too, it says something about human psychology. Something that we've seen across analytics, this analytics revolution that's happening in every sport that I know of, is the one thing that is universally true across every sports analytic movement, is that coaches and players, it turns out, have been too risk averse in the past. And that's the case in every sport. In football, it's like you didn't go for it on fourth down enough. And you would think that people, the human psychology would make you more impulsive. You might think that. But it actually does the opposite. It makes you want to hedge your bets on so much of this stuff. In basketball, it's, well, the two-pointer is a higher percentage shot. So even though it's a lower variance shot, so we're going to choose that. Even though the three-pointer is more effective, it's just higher variance. And so there are all of these ways that we've looked at it. And so if you're going to propose things that are, hey, This might be higher risk. It's hard to get that buy-in. You normally need some sort of track record, either a track record of other people doing it and it working, or a track record of you being consistently right about stuff and having earned the trust of the people around you enough for them to say, you know what? I've never seen this thing work, but whatever, you're smart and you're usually right. And so we're going to try it. And it could be that blind faith in somebody in the front office. It could be blind faith in a coach. It could be blind faith in a player. But normally you need that sort of foundation in order to try things. That's why generally in every single aspect of humanity, we just do things in the same way until somebody innovates something. And then we start doing it that way.
Perfect answer. And there were so many threads in there that I would love to pull on. We could easily spend the whole podcast talking about this, but it's just, I started laughing as soon as you started answering, because my secondary question was going to be, from a coaching standpoint, is getting player buy-in one of, if not the most important trait from a coach? It sounds like you very directly answered that, because I was thinking about this, and like, you could be a brilliant X's and O's tactical brilliant genius like a JJ Redick, this is not anything about his ability to get buy-in. I don't know. But that doesn't seem, from my standpoint, from the outside looking in, as valuable as somebody who just, can get players to do what they are asking them to do, and to move in a particular direction, both, like you said, players and organizational standpoint, because you mentioned this kind of incongruency between knowledge and decision making from a player standpoint. You might see them make decisions and be like, have assumptions about them, but then you talk to them and you're like, whoa, this guy's brilliant. He knows like everything. Why is there this disconnect? A place I see a disconnect is what we call effectively organized offense versus, I forget the other term, but like non-organized offense. And I'll see really, really smart guys like, I'm sure you know him, Cranjus McBasketball, Tim, who, one of the
I know him on Twitter.
Yeah. And he calculates the organized offensive effectiveness for the Lakers. And it'll be like, when they run organized offense, they are unstoppable. They are dominant. And then when they don't, it's like, it's not that great. And I'm just like, okay, why don't they just keep running organized offense? Like, what's happening here? And then you look and it's like, they have Luka Doncic, they have LeBron James, two guys who are the best at organizing offense on their own in the history of the league. And maybe they're taking it upon themselves to say, well, when I do it, it'll work. And so, yeah, you can call whatever you want to call JJ from the sidelines, but I'm out here. I know what's going on. I understand the flow of the game. I understand where we're at this point in the game. I understand who needs a shot at this point in time. Like all of these subtle things that, can't really be accounted for from that. And I just, that divide is so interesting to me. So I wonder if you have any comments on that before we move forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think also like there's another part of this too, which is like, just like LeBron might say, you know what, I got to do this because I noticed that Jackson Hayes hasn't had a touch in 6 possessions and we're going to lose him defensively if he doesn't get a touch on this possession. Just like LeBron might notice that, a coach has to notice that LeBron might not be playing like LeBron if you don't let him play like LeBron every once in a while. Like, you kind of sometimes have to let like Luka Doncic do his thing. Will Hardy had a great quote earlier this year about Jordan Clarkson, where, the one I'm going to say?
Yeah. I heard the quote. Yep.
It was a great quote where, I'll paraphrase him because I don't have it in front of me. And if I try to quote it directly, I'm not going to say it nearly as eloquently as Will Hardy did. But, he was asked about coaching Jordan Clarkson, who he's clearly super close with and who he clearly has an incredible affection for as a player, as a teammate, as a guy who he coached. And he talked for a very long time about why that is and how, Clarkson was one of the vets who like bought in first and went out of his way to make sure other guys did too, and how appreciative he is of that for him, doing that for him. and then how close they grew after the fact. And he talked about, Jordan Clarkson is a guy who, it's like, you want to talk about a guy who's going to deviate from however you define organized offense. It's like, that's Jordan Clarkson, but he also won a 6-man of the year doing exactly that. So like, he has had plenty of success over the course of his career in being able to play that way. And what a really good coach does, in my opinion, is doesn't get everybody to play into some sort of box. A really good coach figures out the stuff that makes you inherently you and brings out the stuff that's inherently good in you and dampens down the stuff that's not, because we all have certain stuff that's inherently good and certain stuff that's not productive. And, Will Hardy compared Jordan Clarkson as opposed to, just like a gunslinger, which is what so many people would call him. Will Hardy compared him to an artist. He said he's an artist. And he said, all I asked him is that, 75% of the time you play a song that we all know. And then 25% of the time you can go and play one of your indie hits.
Guitar solo, I think is what he said.
Guitar solo. That was what it was.
Yeah.
You can go on one of your guitar solos, which is like perfect, And Will Hardy got buy-in, and he got Jordan Clarkson to play within a lot of team concepts that maybe he felt like he wouldn't have done if he approached it in a different way. And I think there are a million different ways that coaches go about getting buy-in from a million different players. It could be the same coach on the same team with different players doing it different ways, because the whole point is like every person is different. Every coach is different. Every player is different, and relationships between them are going to be different, and they all have to be handled differently for the most part. The one thing that I will say is I think the common thread with all the coaches who have buy-in is that they're authentic to who they are. The phonies, they lose. Maybe right away they trick some people, but if you're phony, eventually you lose it. It falls off. People notice it. Coaches and players spend too much time together. If you're phony, people sniff it out eventually. And so the one thing I will say is they're just authentic to who they are. Steve Kerr is very authentic to who he is. Tom Thibodeau could not be more of a different personality type, is very authentic to who he is. They have extremely different ways of getting buy-in. Both of them have had guys who have had extreme buy-in, like with Curry and like with Brunson. And both those guys have had cases where they've had extreme not buy-in, like with Jonathan Kuminga and with Mikal Bridges, or Cam Reddish. Like we've seen that time and time again with these guys. And but the thing that they have in common, the reason that they're able to get buy-in at all, is that they're authentic to their actual personalities, and they're authentic to what makes them NBA coaches.
So enlightening. Really appreciate that answer. I could talk to you about this all day. It's funny, Fred, because I get accused of being like a pure stats analytical person, but these are the things I'm thinking about all the time. And the fact is just that it's a black box for me and for a lot of us. You have a lot of insight into this because you see these interactions and relationships. And to me, I'm like, well, I'm not going to comment on stuff I just have no idea about. Like, I need to ask Fred about this, or I need to ask people who know. And if I don't have an access point, I'm going to talk about the stuff that I know, the stuff that I can see, what we can see on the court, the data, all of those kinds of things. And that's just kind of my methodology. But from the standpoint of like how this impacts the result on the court, I think is the stuff that you know and are privy to are the most important stuff, even more important than all the things that we can just see or crunch numbers on. And so that's why I'm super appreciative to have you comment on that stuff. We're going to get to the Knicks in a second, but a team specifically that I want to ask you about is the Charlotte Hornets. I'm a huge LaMelo Ball guy. He is my favorite player to watch in the league. I think he's so misunderstood and underrated. I really like guys who can subvert kind of expectations for what a star looks like. Like we have I'm not going to compare him to Nikola Jokic, but we have the Jokic thing of, well, you need to be a guy who's obsessive about basketball, who eats, sleeps, and breathes it, who like that's all he cares about. And Jokic is like, oh, this is my job, man. Like I'm really good at my job. I take my job very seriously, but like I got a lot of other things I care about and want to do. And it's like that subversion of the expectations that we have for these players. I really enjoy that. LaMelo does it in a different way, let's say, than Nikola Jokic does, but he's so good to me. And you have LaMelo, you have Colin Knippel, you have Brandon Miller, another guy who I think is extremely underrated. All these high volume, deep 3-point range shooters. LaMelo, one of the best passers, quick processors, anticipatory, willing passer in the league. Super smart drafting they're doing over there, getting undervalued guys like Sion James, Ryan Kalkbrenner late in the draft because, they played 4 or 5 years in college, but they're really good at basketball. So yeah, you should pick those guys up. Moussa Diabate, who, by the way, would be a dream center for the New York Knicks in terms of what he does on the rebound, on the boards and all that stuff. They're just playing so well. Better net rating than the Lakers, who are 27-17, 5th in the West. The Hornets somehow have a better net rating than they do. What are your thoughts on what they want to do, coming up, let's say the trade deadline and like moving forward from there? It seems like they could go a number of ways. And also just what are your thoughts about the Hornets just in general? I love to just pick your brain about them.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're going to do leading into the deadline. This stretch over the last 3 weeks has kind of confused me. They're 7-6 in their last 13, right? And they're since January 2nd over this stretch, they're 7-6, but they're like second or third in the league in net rating. And the reason why is because they've had some close losses, and then they've just had some games where they've just annihilated teams. Like they beat Utah
just
by
blow
55.
Guys out. Yeah,
right. They beat Utah by 55, and they killed even. I mean, they have good wins. Like they killed Oklahoma City, they killed Orlando. They have some good wins over this period, and the losses have been mostly close. Brandon Miller has played really well. He didn't get off to a great start with his shot earlier this year, and he's been really good in January. LaMelo is interesting in fewer minutes. Like he's kind of limiting the turnovers lately, which really helps. And one of the things with them, we started off with talking about offensive rebounding, but didn't really talk about offensive rebounding. So let's talk about rebounding, because the thing coming into the year with them was like, who the hell are their centers going to be? How is this team going to be able to play big? Diabate, like you said, is a great rebounder, always has been. Not always a great defensive rebounder, great offensive rebounder, great positive rebounder. One of the best rebounders in the NBA who never actually boxed anyone out. He really focused this offseason on boxing guys out and getting better at that skill. He's way better at it now. I think his individual rebounding numbers are down a little bit this year. The overall rebounding numbers in terms of the effect when he's there are really, really good. Kalkbrenner is massive and just carves out space. And during the stretch where they're 7-6, I think they're the number 1 rebounding team in the league. Yeah, they are. By a good margin, right? They're like top 3 in offense and defense. And when you have LaMelo limiting his turnovers over this stretch, and you have them getting the second or third highest percentage of available offensive rebounds, second or third highest percentage of available defensive rebounding opportunities, now all of a sudden you've got a team that's going to win the possession game by a lot. And they've got a pretty good analytical profile for a bad team. And all of a sudden you're going to start winning some games. They're interesting. It's kind of all coming together in an interesting kind of way. And I haven't asked about them since they've gone on this whole stretch. So I can't say what they're going to do leading into the deadline and how this is going to affect them. But they've got an interesting crew of players. Miller, LaMelo. I mean, to be clear, I don't think they're going to end up moving LaMelo. I mean, that's the thing that will get clicks on their trade.
I haven't even been thinking about that. That's what people are always talking about. Are they moving? I'm like, they're not moving LaMelo. I don't think they're moving LaMelo. I guess, I could maybe see a Miles Bridges trade or something. I'm not. That'd be the big one. I don't think so, but that'd be the big one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to set the likelihood at that less than 50%, but if there were going to be a trade of consequence with Charlotte, maybe that's it. Maybe there's a Miles Bridges trade or something.
Colin Sexton is the other one I was thinking about. Just he's an expiring, and who knows, are they going to sign Colin Sexton long term? Like that's the question.
Right, for sure. That's a good one. I mean, I could see them just saying screw it and holding on to him and being like, yeah, just string along the asset and then can trade him next year, give him another 2 years. Like, I understand that there are more teams with cap space this summer than there were last summer, but bird rights are still way more valuable now than they were a few years ago before this current iteration of the CBA. And Colin Sexton's best chance to actually get a good salary is still by just re-signing with Charlotte. So
that's really interesting.
So I think if they wanted to do that, I could see them doing that. I also don't think Sexton is going to get you nearly enough to where you're going to have like massive buyer's remorse, or I guess non-buyer's remorse. I don't know what that would be. It would be non-seller's remorse. Like I don't know what it would be.
Phrasing.
And I think this is an organization like if they can sneak into the play-in tournament, maybe they'd want to. Like, I think they're
a favorite for the 10 spot to me personally. Just watch it. I watch every Charlotte Hornets game. So
that is such a depressing sentence.
No, man.
Favorite for the 10 spot. Man.
Yeah, that part.
You're
right.
A favorite, not even the favorite. A favorite for the 10 spot. You're the only
didn't
time
come out right.
The only time in life where we give somebody credit for finishing in the 33rd percentile of something. Like
it's rough. Listen, they like you talked about, like their analytical profile does not match their win-loss total at all. Like it is totally off base. And to me, if I'm going to look at anything, I'm going to look at their net rating, and that's going to help me understand how good they are. Looking at health this season, they were not healthy early in the season. Brandon Miller missed a ton of games. LaMelo missed a ton of games, and now they're healthy. Things are going well. Some of the wins are starting to accumulate. And so I just think they're a much better team than their record suggests. This is like, in the MLB where a guy is like 9-9 and you're like, how can this guy be Cy Young? It's like, well, because he has a 1.7 ERA. Like, it's like that's how I feel about them. So
yeah, I mean, look, I wouldn't compare them to having a 1.7 ERA.
Fair enough.
But I agree with your sentiment. They're a favorite for the 10 seed.
Right. I'm glad we could agree on that statement.
They're one of a few favorites for the 10 seed in the raucous Eastern Conference, where it's just filled up with 10 seed powerhouses.
That's hilarious. All right, we're gonna talk Knicks now, who are a little better than a favorite for the 10 seed. I can say that with I can say that with my chest out, Fred. So one question I have about the Knicks for you is basically the idea that has gone around that they competing for the NBA Cup, especially when you're in later rounds, you're not just like competing for fun. It becomes serious and intense, like almost a playoff level intensity. That is a huge contributor to the struggles that they've had. And obviously seems like they may be starting to turn the corner there, putting together a couple wins. But I think the correlation is there potentially. And this is something I've thought about a lot. I also think there's a plausible mechanism for how this might work. Firstly, it's very unnatural for NBA players to dial up the level of intensity like that in the middle of a season to a playoff level intensity and then just go back to regular season intensity. Like, how do you even do that? It's a weird thing. Like, because I don't think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Fred. I don't think NBA players are consciously during the regular season, like, I'm going to play at like 80, 90%. I'm going to chill out. And then, I'm going to really dial it. I think they just aren't maxing out. And then when you get to the playoffs, you're like, wait, this is actually what it looks like to max out, and then how do you down regulate after doing that? Like, how do you find that regular season ground? Things start to slip. Guys start to be frustrated seeing those slips. Creates internal turmoil. You get less sharp with your principles, all kinds of things like that, your identity. I could imagine this, even though it seems like a cope almost, like people will say, I could imagine this being largely responsible for the issues in terms of the genesis point and taking time to kind of work out. What are your thoughts on that sort of like hypothesis and some of that framing?
I think maybe that was I think maybe that was part of what was going on with them at the beginning of their struggles. By the end of it, I think it comes off as more of an excuse than a reason.
Okay.
I think ultimately, like, you're not wrong. You're totally not wrong. And I think every team that's like done that in the NBA Cup has experienced some sort of that experience. Like, experience is the wrong word because I just used it, but it's experienced some sort of that mentality where it's like the come down from it is really weird. The Knicks played in Vegas, and then less than 48 hours later, they had to go play the worst team in the Eastern Conference in Indiana. It's just a weird sort of vibe change. It's very strange. I compared it, a very relatable analogy that anyone listening can relate to. I compared it to having to go to school on Monday after your bar mitzvah. Like, it's
I've been there, man. I've been there.
Yeah, of course. Anyone has. It's just like a wait. I just had the bar mitzvah. Now I have to go back to school. I thought we were done with life at this point. I thought it was over. I thought I was a man. And I understand how that would happen in the next few games. I think it's hard to say that was just like the reason for them falling off for a month straight, especially when the team who they beat in the final was like, all right, now how about we beat the Thunder 3 times in a row? Like, let's just reel off win after win after win after win after win and look insanely great. So I do think like different individuals handle different situations differently. No question. And I do think it was probably a reason for it leading up. And their schedule was tough during the stretch. That being said, and I said this when it happened, I don't care if the NBA all of a sudden puts a second NBA Cup, all right, that immediately follows the first. The Knicks make that one, then make it to the finals, then win or lose in the finals, whichever one you think is more emotionally damaging. That's what happens to them. Then the NBA says, we are going to institute a rule only for the New York Knicks that says that you have to play a back-to-back. And on the last end of that back-to-back, they have to play on the road in Sacramento. They should win that game by 40 because it's the Kings. A team like that against the Kings should win by 40. And they lost by 1 million in Sacramento after 2 days rest, a month after the Cup. That wasn't the only time where we were like, what is going on here? The Dallas game was what is going on here? And then you hear about the discontent that's happening behind the scenes and that kind of stuff. And that's self-inflicted. That's the kind of stuff that's self-inflicted. That's not cup inflicted. And like, yeah, like you have a downturn after the top cup and all of a sudden there's turmoil, but your job as a team, I'm not even going to put any blame on any particular individual. I'm not going to put blame on players, coach, front office, whatever. I'm just going to say your job as a team, and this is everyone in an organization, is to help set up a system and help set up a culture so that when you have struggles, which are inevitable, you don't collapse inward on yourself. You don't start playing the blame game. You don't start turning on people, or you don't start not playing hard in certain fashions. You don't start going about the job in a way that you weren't previously going about the job. And that's on the individuals who are involved in doing that. And the Knicks stopped doing the job in the way that they were previously going about doing the job. And whatever the reason, that's what happened. And I don't think like, oh, they won the cup is a good enough reason to stop doing that. That being said, obviously winning a game by 54, even if it is against the Nets, is a encouraging thing. And while the end of that Sixers game was one of the most disastrous basketball experiences I have ever seen, mostly because of the way it was called. They won in Philly on a night when Joel Embiid looked really good, and the Sixers were at full strength, and that was a real game. That was a real game against the Sixers, and they won that game and played an excellent third quarter in the process.
I love that answer because I was thinking about the domino effect of, when everything's going well, everybody, there's no internal turmoil. It's great. We're winning. Who cares? Like, we can blow off little differences we have with one another because we're like dominating the league. It doesn't matter. So I was thinking about the domino effect of the stuff happens from the cup. You start to struggle. Those things that you blew off before now are infuriating you. And you guys are having actual issues. But to your point, to be a great team, part of being a great team is being insulated against when those things happen. You don't let them spiral out of control. You stop them. And then you're like, no, we're still a great team, or we're going to implement our stuff and we're going to win games and we're going to get back on track. That is part of being a good team. You can't just let it get away from you and be like, we're still a good team though. Like it doesn't, that's part of it. And so that's a really helpful framework.
Right. I mean, look at what's happened with Oklahoma City. They started off 24-1, and since then they're 13-9, something like that. And they have, 13-9 for most teams would be nothing. It wouldn't even be a blip. It would be a lot of teams. If you're a favorite for the 10 seed, it would be encouraging.
Right. Yeah. But they're going to be 13-9 sometime this season, Fred, just so you know, but go ahead.
But for them, 13-9 is, oh my goodness, what is wrong in Oklahoma City? And Sam Presti had this great quote from a couple of years ago that went viral recently when Oklahoma City lost like 6 out of 12 or 6 out of 11, or 5 out of 11, whatever it was. And it was him talking about how every team, no matter how good, twice a year, the sky is going to be falling. And you just have to go through it, and you have to see how you respond to it. I'm watching Oklahoma City go 13-9 over these games. They've had some injuries. Jalen Williams is now out again. They were literally having like Kenrich Williams facilitate the offense yesterday. Like they're a different team right now than they'll be when they have the real version of their team. And that's obviously a large part of it, but it's not everything. They have lost some games where you're like, what, why are they struggling to this degree? That being said, I don't think anybody there is like, oh no, everything that we thought was happening earlier is now wrong. Or, oh no, all the stuff that we had problems with earlier, we're now going to turn on each other for. To be clear, I don't think the Knicks all turned on each other. That's not what I'm saying. I'm being dramatic for effect. But like, you have to trust your teammates and trust your process and trust your system. And when you don't have that, like, it's a house of cards.
Yeah, that's such a helpful explanation there. Last quick Knicks question before we talk a little bit about the trade deadline and then get you out of here. So Josh Hart specifically is obviously a beloved New York Knick and New York like person just in general, a unique player, great player in the league. But we have this conversation here on Hot Hand Theory, on Locked On Knicks, the other pod that I do, whether his spacing is an issue in the starting lineup. And this is a conversation I think has had broadly, has lessened steam because Josh Hart's shooting the lights out of the ball this season. But all that said, the Knicks starting lineup played 2,300 possessions last season, which is, I can't stress enough how many possessions that is for a single lineup to play in a single season. It's over 500 possessions more than the next most. And it was just statistically mediocre, right? And they're coming into the season, they're running back the same lineup. And the effect of putting a big on Josh Hart when they choose to, when teams choose to, sometimes they don't. It's kind of like we were talking about with the offensive what I was talking about with the offensive rebounding thing, where it's like, it seems like, offensive rebounding, you're going to give up all this transition, but it's like, if you really look into the numbers, it's like, it's worth it. The trade-off is worth it. So it's like, hey, we'll give Josh Hart 4 or 5 of these threes. He'll shoot 40% on them. But what we're getting in terms of keeping our rim protector close by the rim, that is worth whatever Josh Hart's going to shoot on these threes, unless he takes a ton of them. And he's still sort of reluctant to take a ton of those threes, or at least it seems that way. So to me, I just thinking about that, like the bunch of the possessions of the same lineup, mediocre play, it could potentially be better. At least we think it could be better. And then we could think of maybe starting a guy like Deuce McBride, maybe starting a guy like Landry Shamet. Now you have 5-out look with elite spacing. Now you pair Mitchell Robinson and Josh Hart in the second unit. Now you have a clear identity where they're dominating the boards. These are just theories. These are like fan and outside analyst speculations about ways that the team could look. But my question for you really is, do you think starting lineup changes are something that the Knicks have or would even consider? Or is it simply like, these are our 5 best guys. We think Josh Hart's one of our 5 best guys. Something catastrophic would have to happen for us to change, to go away from that. And again, you don't even have to comment on what the Knicks might think around that, but what's your perspective there as far as like, are there factors and stuff that people like me aren't considering enough? We're looking at the data. We're like, man, this doesn't look great. This could be amazing. What are we not considering? Maybe personality stuff, comfortability stuff, all those kinds of factors.
Yeah. I think they would make a starting lineup change. Like I could see them reinserting Mitchell Robinson into the starting lineup at some point, especially with the way that Robinson has been playing lately and his ability to play more minutes now. He just played a season high minutes against Philly, in part because Cat was in real foul trouble. The double big lineups have just not been as good as I thought they were going to be. I came into this year thinking the double big lineups were really going to be effective for them, especially with the way that Mitch played in the playoffs last year. And we haven't really seen that be the case. I haven't given up my optimism for them all the way, to be honest. I still think there's a way for them to be able to figure out how to make it work. Because ultimately, I really think the best version of this team has Mitchell Robinson on the floor. He is such a swing factor. I will disagree a little bit with something you said. Not a lot, but a little bit. I don't think that Hart's shooting has been nearly the issue in that lineup this year that it was last year. Not just because he's making his shots. I mean, this might be a part of the fact that he's making his shots. But Cat's not seeing wings guard him nearly as much this year as he did last year. And that was really what the problem was. It was center is going to roam, and also a wing is going to guard Cat. And Cat's not as good if he's going up against even a half decent defensive wing. He's not going to be as good in that scenario as he is when he can go up against a big and he can just like out quick a big on the perimeter or pull a big out to the 3-point arc and, you know, just start draining threes or whatever else. Like that's when Cat is really able to hit his best. And we're not seeing teams put wings on Cat as often this year as we did in the second half of last year, in part because Hart is making his threes. I'm sure that has something to do with it. There are 2 things that are interesting with that lineup when you dig into the numbers, and when you dig into the film on it. The first thing that I would say is, for some reason, that lineup isn't getting offensive rebounds. I don't know why. They have Hart on the floor and they have Cat on the floor. They should be getting offensive rebounds. Every other lineup for the Knicks gets offensive rebounds. Even when Mitchell Robinson is not on the floor, this is a good offensive rebounding team. That lineup isn't getting offensive rebounds. I don't know why. I feel like it has to be just a statistical blip, and eventually it will start to get offensive rebounds. And when it does, the offensive numbers on that lineup will be better because they have actual offensive rebounding talent out there. And it seems to me weird. They're getting like 20% of available offensive rebounds, which is nothing. It's nothing. Every other normal Knicks lineup is over 30. Like, why is that lineup 20? It's so weird. I feel like that's got to come up. And so when that comes up, I feel like you're going to be in better shape on offense. To me, the biggest thing that has really been the issue is their point of attack defense all year has just not been good enough. And when you don't have a rim protector on the back line to make up for that, it only exacerbates the problem. And we're seeing that time and time again. And I think it's a bigger problem this year than it was last year, even though it's the same personnel. It's just shown more. Bridges has basically, since his really hot shooting start for the first month and a half of the season, he's kind of been the same guy that he was last regular season. on both sides of the floor. And Anunoby, I think, has had like a below his standards last month on both sides of the floor, including defensively. He's not played at the all defense level that he's capable of being at. And Hart is just not going to be like your lead point of attack defender. And then when you got Brunson and Cat out there at the same time, then it gives teams opportunities to just pick at those two guys, especially late in games. So I think that has been the biggest issue with that lineup. And if you want to say like, okay, maybe Mitch over Josh Hart isn't the answer, maybe Deuce over Josh Hart isn't the answer, then I think that's the best way to make that argument.
Yeah.
Where, like,
and Fred, not to interrupt you, but like, that's definitely part of the argument, which is having that on-ball defender, that point of attack defender. Because Josh, OG, and Mikal are all kind of similar defenders in that they're really great wing defenders. They can guard one-on-one, but they're not scrambling over the top of screens and being able to stay attached to like a Tyrese Maxey and like they're all gonna struggle with that. And so if you have nobody to do that, you're basically inviting perimeter guys to penetrate and get to the rim and then collapse your defense over and over and over again. Going to be hard to defend that way. Part of the Deuce McBride, at least, argument is you got a guy who's going to fight over screens, who's going to stay attached to guys, he's going to rear contest, make that collapsing a lot more difficult. So now on one end, you have the spacing idea where you have, you're pulling the rim protector away. You're going to have to put your 5 on Cat now. Like you said, they're kind of already still doing that, but now the rim is wide open. And then on the other end, you got a guy who's playing defense on the perimeter, keeping these small, fast guards. We saw what the Spurs were doing against the Knicks with Stephon Castle and De'Aaron Fox. Those guys are living in the paint. You got to slow that down to have a chance against some of these teams. So that's part of the idea as well.
But okay, you mentioned the Spurs. Regular season game against the Spurs, not the cup game. Knicks blow a lead to them, right? Spurs come back, they win by 2. Score 130 some odd points in that game. 134, 132, whatever it was. What happens in the fourth quarter of that game? How do the Spurs score all those points? They put Brunson and Cat into every action.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a weakness of this team that's inherent. And the good teams are going to do that, especially in the moments that matter in the playoffs and that kind of stuff. The good offenses are going to be able to figure out the proper procedures to go about that. And the Knicks have to find ways to protect themselves against that. I mean, one way is, okay, let's see what you could do with the point of attack and try to start Deuce. And then you have 5 3-point shooters in the starting lineup and you could just throw stuff up. The other thing is having Deuce in a majority on ball role is a good compliment for him because I think he's much better on the ball than he is off it. He has a tendency to overhelp a little bit when he's off. And he always had that tendency. And this year, the Knicks really, really packed the paint when guys drive in. I think, really to protect against their lack of rim protection that they have naturally. And you see Deuce sometimes just stray and then not close out on a guy in time. Whereas on the ball, he could be really feisty, especially against like smaller guards. He can be really, really feisty and obviously just plays crazy hard and is good getting around screens, all that kind of stuff, knows coverages, knows personnel. He's a guy who's good on that front. So I could see having that argument. And I could also see having the argument of like, no, go the opposite sense. If you're not going to stop anybody and guys are going to get to the rim, at least make sure there's a really good contest when you get there. And Mitchell Robinson was not at his level defensively at the beginning of this year. I think lately he's been really good defensively. He's been rebounding like a monster the whole season. But I think he has been much better defensively lately and is starting to look like himself because when he is at his best, when he's the fully healthy, fully optimized version of himself, he's all defense caliber. He's never going to make it because he's never going to play enough to be eligible. But he's that caliber of defender when he's at his best. He's one of the very few. I mean, OG Anunoby is insistent that he's the best defensive player in the NBA. He's insistent, and he has been since last year's playoff run. He has been insistent that he is the best defensive player in the NBA. Like it is the only thing that OG Anunoby is insistent about. It's
That's
like
incredible.
he brings up anytime you give him a lane to bring it up, he brings it up. Sometimes when you don't, like he was during the playoffs last year, he was like begging me to write that Mitch is the best defensive player in the NBA. Like he was like, you have to write that. It is absolutely true. Like you have to do a whole story on how he's become the best defensive player in the league. Like he's like, there's nobody who can do the combination of things that he can do. There's nobody else in the league who can do that. And like even the other day in Philly, like Christian Winfield, beat reporter from Daily News, asked him about like the defensive player of the game stuff that Mike Brown does. And he asked him about Mitch being only one behind OG for leading the team. And OG was like, oh, he should win every game. Like he should just win it every game. Like he deserves to win every game. Like
that's incredible.
Oh yeah. OG thinks he is the best defender. I wouldn't be surprised if OG just thought he was like the best defender OG played with Kawhi. So I don't know.
Like prime Kawhi.
Yeah, prime Kawhi. Yeah. Prime Kawhi. So I don't know. I kind of take back that statement. But OG, like that guy clearly loves Mitch. Clearly loves Mitch and loves playing with Mitch. But you know, maybe the answer is you just have backline rim protection. I think they're going to continue with this lineup and give it a try. You know, I think Hart has, talked about his conversations with Mike Brown and him feeling more comfortable just having a consistent role and not necessarily bouncing around. Just like Brown picking one and him having a consistent role. And Brown is obliged with that, put him in the starting lineup and has kept him there. And I think that does factor into it to a degree. I don't think it's like Josh Hart's going to throw a fit if you move him back, but I think he was uncomfortable at the start of the year, kind of bouncing around, and he wanted some more consistency. And he explicitly told Mike Brown, like, consistency will help me a lot. If I just have consistency, that will help me a lot. And Mike Brown listened and obliged, and Hart has played really well.
He's played as well as you could ever ask Josh Hart to play. So yeah,
he's had, I think, is the best year of his career. Like, so this is not a Josh Hart knock.
Agreed.
I mean, the other part of it is like, you just need Mikal Bridges to play better. And you need OG Anunoby to play better, which I thought he was really good against Philly. But you need Mikal Bridges to play better than 3 for 16, than 32% from 3 in January, than, you know, the point of attack stuff, which is not quite good enough. And you need him to be better than that. And I know it sounds like simple and hot takey, but you just kind of, sometimes you just like need a guy to play better, you know?
I have the same eval as you. This is something we've talked about here. The two wings need to play better for the Knicks, both shooting, defensively, all around is going to be key if they have any hope of, you know, being who the team that a lot of people thought they could be coming into the season. But Fred, super insightful. I got to get you out of here on time. I really, really appreciate you coming on. For the High Hand Theory listeners and myself, obviously, you know, I feel like we learned a lot today, and you came on with us for the first time almost 2 years ago. We had like 200 subscribers, and you were so generous with your time. You came on, super insightful, and we've grown quite a bit in that time. And you have grown a ton in that time. You're like on the biggest shows. You're on The Ringer. You're on Zach Lowe. You're breaking down film with Chet Holmgren and still making time for us. So we're really grateful for that and to get your knowledge, man. So really appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. Anything you want to shout out real quick before we go?
No, you can read my stuff on The Athletic. You can subscribe to my podcast, Katz and Shoot, at patreon.com/Katz and Shoot. It's KATZ is my last name. And yeah, that's it. Listen to Hot Hand Theory.
Appreciate that, man. And anyone watching this, obviously, it should be clear how elite Fred is. And you should be reading, listening to, watching his stuff if you aren't already. Fred, thanks for coming on. And this has been Hot Hand Theory.